So hello everyone, hello Clint Esposito. Clint, how are you doing, my man?
I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, Clint. Well, I really appreciate the time that you take to speak with me. And let's talk about freestyle motocross. Let's talk about your career, night of the jumps, contests in general, and of course, a tad about comedy.
All right, let's do it.
So let's start off with the traditional question of the podcast. How did you get involved with dirt bikes?
So when I was young, my father actually rode before I was born, but he stopped when I was
Mm-hmm.
born, to be so he didn't have any accidents just on the road. He didn't ride dirt bikes or anything. So I didn't actually see anybody ride
Mm-hmm.
motorcycles for the most part, but there was one in my father had two Harleys, and then his friend had left like a Honda CB 125 in the garage. And finally, after years, I was just like, I want to ride that. I want to ride that. So I convinced him to, let me ride it. And he used to take off. He would start off with the
Mm-hmm.
clutch and then jump off of the back, and I would ride it around. And then
Mm-hmm.
eventually one day he was on the phone and I had enough. So I pushed it over to a bench so I could get up onto it and took off for the first time with the clutch. And that was a super fun day, obviously.
And how old are you?
Then I was probably 8 or 9, probably 9. The first time I started riding motorcycles.
What about dirt bikes? How did you start with that? I mean, racing and so on.
So in '89, which this kind of started, I guess maybe the motorcycle thing, I had seen Supercross, actually
Mm-hmm.
Dallas Supercross. That was we had just gotten cable, so that was my first introduction, and I loved it since then.
Mm-hmm.
And once I turned Uh, I actually raced bicycles for
Cool.
like a season, and I came home and I talked to my parents, and they're like, because I would go with my friends to go and race. They didn't come, so
Mm-hmm.
then I talked to them, and they're like, "Well, if you're gonna race, we'd rather you race, dirt bikes."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "What? I would rather race dirt bikes." So we started racing dirt bikes.
What about freestyle motocross? How did that come about?
I rode at a local professional's house that had, a
Mm-hmm.
good track and big jumps and stuff. And he was an ex Supercross racer.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Who is the
person
guy?
that, huh?
Who is the guy?
Mark Pillion.
Mark Pillon.
So he was top 20 in 125 Supercross and
Mm-hmm.
actually got to go to Japan one year to,
Cool.
to race the Supercross there and stuff. So that's pretty awesome.
Cool.
So he had a real peaky he had supercross style jumps
Mm-hmm.
on his course, which most of the pros didn't even come out and ride there because they didn't want to have to jump the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know any better. I was just young. So I was like, oh, this is what it is. So I rode there all the time. After I'd do my half an hour motos,
Mm-hmm.
I would start doing knacks and
Cool.
no footed cans, or probably 1 footed cans at the time still. And the guy that was organizing um freestyle motocross for Monster Jam,
Mm-hmm.
which this is like the first season that they ever did it. I'm probably one of the first 5 or 6 guys to test the freestyle ramp for
Cool.
Feld. And then we started doing the monster truck show, or they asked Mark to go and do the shows. Mark had a business and a daughter and stuff. He's like, I can't travel around and do this
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But I have a kid with, that races the pro class that's already doing some tricks.
Who was you?
So, and that was me. So he gave them my name and number. And a week later, I was testing the ramp. That's where I met Derek Berlew. He was like 16. And then Chad Smith and Robbie Wood, which I knew those guys a little bit from racing because everybody was from Jersey. I mean, it just lucked out that I happened to be in the area, I guess. But
Yeah, and that's interesting because back in the day, in the early 2000s, freestyle motocross was booming on West Coast. But you were the first to start a thing on East Coast, FMX East. Could you tell me more about freestyle motocross at that point in time?
so we did have a lot of, you know, people trying to get into it over here and starting to ride. Once monster jams, I guess, started to happen,
Mm-hmm.
they needed more riders for that anyway, because Monster Jam has like, probably 6 events a weekend. So
Wow.
they needed a lot of riders. So we ended up having a big group, a fairly big group of guys that would come in and out. And then that also led to the Ramp to Ramp IFMA series, which it was basically the same person handling riders and everything for that. So it was the same group of guys. But I just saw it as like nobody was going to come over and put us in videos. And we were so far outside the industry that I just thought that I would start my own team, do my own videos, and book my own events. And that's how FMX East basically, got started. And then I was actually putting out videos. So I put out 2 DVDs. In between those 2 DVDs, YouTube started. So we were actually putting freestyle motocross videos out. We called them FMX East mixtapes because, rappers have mixtapes in between their like full albums. So we would put out, Paul Smith and I would put out basically a couple videos a week and just call them mixtapes. And that was, like I said, like 05 or 06, like basically as soon as YouTube started.
That
I
was
never knew it would turn into what it is, or I would have a much
nobody
better
knew.
channel.
Nobody knew actually. And by the way, how long did FMX East last?
Probably 16 years.
Wow, that's a long time, man.
Yeah. Eventually, I ended up partnering with somebody in Texas and we started another company. So, and also I realized that I was kind of really is kind of restricting having the name be like FMX, which is a very niche thing, and then East, which is even more niche. So I really brought my audience down to like as small as you could get it.
And by the way, Clint, along with demos and shows, you also compete in some events. Could you tell me more about these experiences?
So, I mean, mainly, I guess there was some little small contests and stuff we even put on in the United States and the ramp to ramp IFMAs, but it was mainly, mostly just shows and demos and stuff like that I did. I did get to experience some bigger stuff mechanicking for Javier, where I met you at Red Bull X Fighters.
Yeah.
I remember being towards the end of my career and going to, I want to say it was Madrid. It was definitely Madrid. And I was on the floor for intros, and just the energy on the floor was like, I need to keep riding.
For sure.
It was, but I'm like, I'll never be in an arena like this again, probably. So.
Yeah, Madrid is a lifetime experience for sure. And by the way, why did you stop riding at a professional level? And I mean,
so we've all had a bunch of injuries, but I had gotten older and I had 2 bad ones, kind of in a row, 2 years apart. The one, I blew my shoulder basically out of the back, ripped my rear deltoid off, broke my femur, bruised my kidneys, and don't remember like that whole week. And then 2 years later, just at a motocross track racing a vet race, they had like this kind of peaky triple. And I just came up short on it, got bucked weird, and I put my leg out and it went under my like handlebars and triple clamp, and I broke my tib fib, compound fractured it, broke my tibial plateau, and tore my meniscus. And I was on crutches for 6 months with that thing. I got an infection. I almost lost my leg, and it's like it took me a long time to get back to probably where like I can ride now. And I did some shows, but I think it was more just like I said, I was getting older, and it was kind of like just a long process to try to, without even be able to walk or function, and booking freestyle shows and not being able to, at least here at the time, without having ramps, going to stuff or riding it, the overhead of it is not very much. Like you're not going to make a bunch unless you're involved in some way. So it just became like something that was going to be a very time consuming for little payback in the shape that I was in.
I
So
can
I needed to
imagine. Yeah.
basically concentrate on myself and try to take it easy and keep my leg. So that was the main goal.
When I was a kid, we didn't have participation trophies. That's right, whoever said that in the back. We didn't have participation trophies. The losing team actually lined up and got spit on by the parents. That's why I'm so tough now.
Let's talk a tad about comedy. Man, how did that happen?
So during one of those times, well, the time being hurt with my shoulder and stuff, or maybe it was even before that, I had started to announce my own shows instead of hiring other people to come in to announce and somebody to fill my riding spot. So I was like, I'll just announce the shows. And during the shows, I'm just talking and like throwing jokes in for myself, not even thinking about it, just kind of saying stuff that was funny to me. And then I started catching a couple of guys in the crowd laughing.
I see.
And then that became fun to me because I'm like, oh, let me see if I can get them to laugh with this.
Yeah, cool.
So then that really was years before though. And it wasn't a direct line. It was like I went back to riding, never really thought about it. And then once I stopped riding, my thought process was, what can I do that'll give me that little bit of adrenaline and where I can have the opportunity to travel if it goes well. And basically I circled back to thinking about comedy, and then I listened to the Joe Rogan podcast at the time, and I'm like, well, he's kind of a meathead as well, so it's not like totally out of the question. There are at least people like me in the space. So and I ended up back in New Jersey, which I'm like, if you're gonna try and do comedy in New York, New Jersey is the place to be anyway. So it just seemed like a good thing to try, I guess. And all that stuff.
Yeah.
So right now he's helped me co-host, and we're doing a show every week, or multiple times a week. We're doing it live stream on the Two Wheels of Freedom YouTube, and we're basically covering Supercross right now because that's what is out. We also have a section where we watch just viral videos, try to include people, freestylers that are doing cool things, or just motorcycle, all different types. We had, I guess, a trials guy on a motocross bike that was blowing our minds yesterday. And I'm like, this is unfair how well this guy can ride this thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and we're also covering the betting a little bit. And our goal is that they do offer betting for X Games and stuff like that as well. So we're going to cover that, and freestyle events when they happen. There's just not enough freestyle events basically a year where you have coverage to be able to do a show every week about freestyle motocross. So
yeah, where do people can find that?
On you can go to YouTube at Two Wheels to Freedom, all spelt out, and Facebook as well. YouTube, I'm kind of more so keep that a little more up to date, but everything for the most part does end up finding its way to Facebook.
Cool. And since we're talking about comedy, what was, let's say, your backflip, your biggest achievement in comedy so far?
Well, so far, just getting to, get flown to Chicago to do a weekend full of shows. So that was pretty cool. Just getting to experience, like I said, traveling and getting to do something like that. I always envied even like skateboarders or BMX guys, because they could like break their stuff down and take it with them on a plane, and then to just be like going like with just my a couple of notebooks or whatever. It was kind of weird because I'm always used to hauling around a motorcycle and ramps and whatever else. So that was a pretty cool feeling to be like, oh, I'm like getting paid for my brain finally.
Cool. Yeah, for sure. And Clint, so let's talk about judging. How did you get into that?
Well, so podcasting, actually, I am, like we talked about before, I went to X Fighters to mechanic for Javier. I have Javier on podcasts all the time, and he's like, I've got somebody that you should interview if you don't know him. He's said Steve Sommerfeld. And I was like, no, I've never talked to him or anything. So he's like, you guys will get along. He said this right off of the bat. And then I had Steve on my podcast, and then we've just always kept in touch. Like he was spot on, because I've known Javier a pretty long time, but he was totally right. We get along great. And I started doing some podcasts with him also on Two Wheels to Freedom. Sometimes we'll watch some old freestyle motocross events and do like companions with them. So it's kind of fun for he and I to sit there and watch older events with the lens of like what the time was, what it was like at the time, and the tricks they're doing and stuff like that. So that's a fun little journey, you know, down freestyle memory lane. So Steve works at Night of the Jumps. So we've always kept in contact, and he's like, hey, and we actually watch the contests and critique stuff. So I guess he realized I had, you know, knew enough to be able to judge. So he invited me to be one of the judges for Night of the Jumps. So that was a long story long on that one, but
interesting. And well, what is the most challenging part on judging? Is, I don't know, judging a criteria like variety is to put is to convert your perspective in points and put that in proper order. What is the hardest part?
I think the hardest part is to keep track of everything that happens in somebody's run. So like, I think to judge somebody individually is one thing, because you can go overall feel, like he had a lot of energy, the tricks overall were good, you know, no big mistakes. But then once you have somebody else that does the run that's very similar, and now all of a sudden you got to remember, did he over rotate flips? Did he under rotate? Did he go long? You know, did he double a trick? Did he do a trick twice? You know, then it becomes really hard to try
The
and
tiny
be like,
details, yeah.
the tiny details to recall once they're really close, because ultimately it's somebody's livelihood on the line. So you want to make sure that you make the right calls.
For sure. You know, well, Clint, we both judged Night of the Jumps in the season 2024. So what's your assessment about the season? I'm talking about riders, about tricks, about the new faces.
I thought it was awesome. I thought, one, there was a lot of new faces, which lately in freestyle, it's kind of been like the same people we've seen for a long time. And it was good for Night of the Jumps to have a lot of new young guys that are really doing well and doing a lot of the big tricks right off of the bat. And you could tell some of the guys just need, once they settle in, you know, and get a teeny bit more experience and just are a little bit calmer, they're going to be killer, you know, because they have the tricks. You could just see that some people getting excited and kind of throwing their runs off a little bit just because they're nervous or probably hold their breath. I've done it.
By the way, do you think the riders understand, let's say, the strategic side of freestyle motocross? I mean, how to build a routine, which tricks put in their runs, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, that's also a learning process, you know, and I would think just figuring out kind of what the judges like, you know, for myself. I always would do this in my own runs, but try to have one of my bigger tricks first and last. Because if you can show me, or if you can do one of your big tricks right off of the bat while you're cold, and then also at the very end when you're tired, you know, that looks really good. So I think it's just like you said, learning what the judges want, and calming down a little bit so that they can perform the whole time, you know, and even you could see some of the guys over rotate or just are a little off because they're excited. You could see them get excited and like pull too hard for flips, and it's just nerves, I think. So
For sure,
those guys will be just fine. They definitely have talent. They just need to get used to the environment.
Yeah. What about the fans? Do you think there's a big gap between judges' perspective and a fan's perspective?
You would hope not. You would hope that the judging would reflect what the fans think. I guess if you get into super technical tricks, like like back in the day, like a Dustin Miller, in my opinion, he didn't. I think the judging reflected maybe the crowd's opinion, like unknowledgeable, like, you know, the average person watching would maybe reflect their opinion. but the stuff that he was doing was so technical that
Yeah.
the judges should have noticed that, and he should have done better. So, but right now, I would say most of the tricks that are big looking. There's not a ton of real fast multiple combo stuff. You know, everything seems to be kind of big. So I would say right now, yes, it should reflect the way that the crowd feels as well.
Cool. That's interesting perspective. And well, Clint, if you could change something, adjust something, or include something in the judging process, what would that be?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's hard. I mean, the other thing is just the time in which you need to get your scores out, but there's not really any way around it because you want them to come out pretty fast just for the flow of the show.
Yeah.
You know, and everything to go on. So I guess that's maybe if you could have more reflection or like adjustment at the end of the whole round. Because sometimes you get a round that's stacked and you're like, oh, I started out too high with some guys because now we're within like 2 points for the top 3 guys because their runs were so good that now we're like, oh no.
Yeah. Where you place your first riders, to have enough room for the other riders, that's really tough. I think people in general have no idea the amount of data that we deal, in a split of second is such a hard thing, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we talked about, there's several factors. Just was their trick good? Is it a hard trick? How was their riding in general?
Yeah.
Did they do a lot of pauses? Did they have energy? Was the crowd behind them? So yeah, there's definitely a lot of things to try and calculate. And then if you have 10 riders, that's a lot of runs. Try to remember to compare them, side by side.
You are talking about dozens and dozens of data to deal, to take the decisions in a split of second.
Yeah, 10 riders, each doing 8 tricks in their run. That's a lot to try and
remember. For sure. That's a lot of things to remember. And well, Clint, could you reflect about something to me? How important is judging to shape freestyle motocross as a sport, to validate some things, to not validate other things? Could you reflect about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think judging format and, like if you look at a sport like figure skating, it's taken very seriously, but gymnastics as well.
Yeah.
And I think our scoring should probably reflect what they do, to some extent, because it's basically the same thing. You need to rate your trick, but then also how good the trick was. And I think those two sports are taken as legitimate because their judging is so strict. But, I think in the past, there have been some very questionable calls with judging in FMX. And I think that does hurt the way that the sport is looked at, to your point, like where you're like, is this a joke or what?
Yeah. And by the way, all the Olympic sports, they have been doing that for decades and decades, and that they had that knowledge. And I think that's a good reference.
Yeah. In a sport that's not just we race and get to the finish line first, you have to have a fairly, tight criteria of judging. Otherwise, it's not going to be taken seriously.
And accountability is essential, to make clear how the process is, how much effort you put in the process. People have no idea how much we speak to each other during the judging and so on. It's not just sitting throw some scores, not at all.
No, definitely not. And like I said before, I rode for a living for a long time, and I feel pressure to make sure that these guys are scored what they should be scored because it's going to reflect in their paycheck.
For sure.
And I don't want to be mess up.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then this guy loses a bunch of money. So, just even on like a personal level like that, like I don't want to, do a bad job.
Yeah, another tough question right now. I know many fans bear that in mind. So how do you rate the most challenging tricks? Sometimes I feel you are comparing apples and oranges. Like how to compare a backflip rock solid to a 360 is it's quite hard, man.
Yeah, and I think, and especially because I haven't done a lot of those tricks, especially double flips and stuff like that, but I think that you have to break it down to the amount of people doing the trick over an extended amount of time. Because if you look at, say, I think personally, and I've never done it, but I think personally, 360s is probably the most technical big freestyle trick.
Yeah.
Because, a double flip is hard and it's scary, but you're only rotating in one direction. And as long as you have your rotation down, for the most part, you should be straight. 360, you have two different axes that you're coming around on. And if you see in the like the early days of 360s, a lot of people would come in, they'd be straight, but their bikes would be tilted and they just get slapped down to their faces. So that's why I think that trick is not done by that many. So to me, that means it's probably harder.
Yeah.
Is that right? I don't know. And everybody's different as well. I had tricks that were easy for me to learn, and then people I thought were way better than me couldn't learn that trick. And I'm like, how can you not get that trick?
Yeah, I was talking to Pomanese a few weeks ago actually, and I asked to him, how hard was for you to learn flipping? Not that hard. What was hard for me was tsunami. I thought, are you kidding me, man? Flip should be way harder, but he had some difficulty with the tsunami and so on. That's exactly what we are talking about. To get the wrong impression. Yeah.
Well, a lot of that is what you're exposed to, right? If the very first time you go to ride ramps with these guys, it's, like, let's look at Spain, for instance. A lot of really good guys come out of Spain for such a small country. Like, why are there all these good guys? Well, there was I call it the Danny Torres effect, right?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Danny was there, took a lot of people under his wing. You got Mikel Malero out of that. He's taking people under his wings.
Exactly.
They all have really good, similar kind of style. Like, it seems to me that they were all exposed to those guys at a high level right off of the bat. And they're just like, this is what we do. They didn't second guess it.
Yeah. Spain has the ecosystem. Right now, they have a Spanish championship. I mean, really pay attention to that. There are so many young kids like Mincha, Francisco Stella, and other guys, man. I'm really impressed about riders there.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I would venture to guess, I'm not really sure, but I bet you they all probably ride together.
Yeah. I think Melero rides with Mincha and so on. I'm not sure if everybody's together, but I know, as you say, Danny, Melero, Mincha, they kind of relate to each other.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it grows. And actually, now that we're thinking about that, during my career, over here, everybody was so spread out on the East Coast of the United States. Everybody was so spread out that we were just excited to ride with anybody. We were like, oh yeah. Then you go out to California and I found out that, like, they were weird about their riding spots and they didn't want other people to have a place to practice because they were competition. And I think that's kind of what happened to the scene in the United States. They stopped riding together. And that's why the militia was so good for so long.
Yeah.
Right? There was 15 dudes that were just super gnarly riding together all the time, foam pit, everything. Of course they're going to get good. And I think that's kind of what happened after that. And now we have a couple of rippers, placed around the country, but it's not like the scene that we used to have. And that's why Australia, they seem to be in groups and ride together. And they're like killing us right now. In the last probably 10 X Games, it's been basically like all Australians.
I'm reflecting about that when I say that California was like, the epicenter for freestyle motocross. Actually, we are talking about south of California. We're talking about Temecula, Murrieta, San Bernardino. This place, everything is like, I don't know, maybe an hour from maximum from each other place.
I would say 2
maximum,
and maybe some of that's because of traffic. But yeah, it's not a very big area. And that was my whole thing. I used to even say that I don't do freestyle motocross because I'm not in Southern California. If you're outside of Southern California, you're just a dirt hump jumper.
And well, since we are talking America, let's talk about freestyle motocross in the US. Well, I know back in the day you organized some contests for amateur riders. So how do you see the American FMX scene these days? I feel there are more like free riders than freestylers in the new generation. By free riders, I mean riders like Tyler Bierman, Kobe Haha, Patrick Evans. How has the freestyle motocross in America changed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that obviously was the goal for all of us, right? If we could have gone and ridden in the hills, that would have been ideal. I do know that those guys, a lot of them, some don't, but a lot of them end up riding monster jams and stuff like that for, some money. But it is definitely more, the culture is more, like soul rider out in like the hills and just doing whips and stuff, which wasn't really, like I said, it wasn't an option when we were started because social media wasn't around, I guess, so there are a couple of guys that are pushing the trick envelope, which Patrick Evans now is kind of going more full on freestyle than just a free rider guy. But I think our biggest right now, America's like best straight trick rider is Colby Gort, who actually rode
in
Night
Brazil,
of the Jumps last year. Oh yeah, and your contest as well. So yeah, there are a couple of guys, but they really are the outliers, the guys that are trying to really like push the envelope and learn all the tricks and flips and front flips and all that type of stuff. So it's cool to see, and I'm definitely a fan of somebody that hopefully he can get the opportunity to go to X Games. I don't see why he wouldn't at this point, like this year, but I don't know.
And do you think there's a future for freestyle motocross in the US in a different shapes and so on, or do you think the focus is continue in free riding?
I don't really know what way it's gonna go. I made guesses 20 years ago that there were gonna be big BMX parks for dirt bikes, and it's just now coming to pass. So I don't know. At that point, I thought the courses were going to get bigger, which X Games had a couple of big courses back in the day.
Yeah.
But after like 06, like every course just got smaller and smaller and smaller until they're basically like even X Games is kind of just a demo. So, I think that I guess imagination, that's really cool. That's almost too much though. Like there's too many jumps there. I almost think they need to be like either build the courses and have them be different contests, like on different days, or like have those courses across different places in the country so that you could have like a free ride series, but we had spoken about it before. Think about in the past, the Great Ride Open and Ride to the Hills, and all these really cool natural terrain contests that happened, like so early on, and then they just kind of went away.
Yeah, and since you are talking about the old days a little bit, now you are working with First Demons and so on. Tell me more about that, man. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I actually once again met John through podcasting. I had done a viewing party for Crusty 1 with all the guys. John, Dana, Bubba, Seth, Emig. We had literally everybody but basically McGrath on there.
Cool.
And years later, John randomly calls me and is like, "Hey, we want you to start producing our podcast." And I was like, "Okay."
Cool.
And then to get the YouTube monetized, I was like, we need constant content. And David Dawes was doing he does all his like raw clips from back in the day. So I was asked those guys, I go, "You guys got to have tons of tapes." And they're like, "Oh, we have just like boxes of tapes."
Wow.
And I said, we need to start transferring some of that to hard drive and getting it to me so I can start putting the raw unseen stuff up. So that's a lot of what I do, is cutting out, just watching, raw unseen footage, cutting out if anything has to be cut out, because sometimes there's stuff that needs to be cut out, and then posting that and then cutting it down into shorts and reels and stuff like that. So I basically manage the YouTube, the Facebook, the Instagram for Crusty right now. But for me to be able to, like, I watched the filming of Steel Roots at Guy Cooper's house raw.
Wow.
So it was like Kenny Bartram, he probably was 17.
Wow.
McGrath, Jimmy Button, Guy Cooper.
I just can imagine the Nuggets, man.
Yeah, there's go and watch it. Right? It's up on that is official Krusty's.
Cool.
On YouTube.
Cool. So I strongly recommend people to go there to watch. And man, I just can imagine the Nuggets, and I'm really looking forward to watch more of that. And well, Clint, before I let you go, what is next for Clint Esposito? Broadly speaking, freestyle motocross, comedy, and so on.
So for the most part right now, I'm concentrating on getting the Two Wheels to Freedom YouTube and Facebook and stuff up and rolling, the podcasts, so that we can, generate a little bit more money through that and spend more time, creating good content. Like this week, I sat down and went through a bunch of footage of Kevin Windham. So the video is who invented the Heelclicker, which everybody thinks it was Mike Metzger if you're into freestyle, or Kevin Windham if you're into motocross. But there was a guy, Gordon Ward, that used to do them at local races and at Australian Supercrosses in like 88.
How did you discover that?
Well, so I have seen that pop up before, but like I said, I have done a series of like who invented which trick.
Cool,
which a lot
man.
of times it's
I
not
love
who
that.
people think invented it, which this is for Two Wheels, but like Kiss of Death was not actually Mike Jones. The original Kiss of Death
Was
was
Ryan
done by
Leba, right?
It was Ryan Leba.
Cool,
And
man.
originally the bike was just vertical, and his face, like the front of his helmet, was on his front fender, and he was flat. That was the original Kiss of Death. Then Mike started making it bigger, but it should have been called something else.
Yeah, man. I love the idea. I love it.
But the name was too cool. So
yeah. Makes sense. Man, I love that. And again, people can find that on YouTube. Everything, right? That's
right. Two Wheels to Freedom on YouTube. And yeah, there's tons of old interviews and stuff like that. And yeah, Scranny and I are handling betting and results, and can't wait for, Night of the Jumps to start back up so we can watch, those and talk about them and get some freestyle motocross going. A little more than internet clips like you were talking about, the internet free riders.
Amazing. Well, Clint, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to talk to you, man. I really appreciate your insights, and man, let's keep in touch, and man, see you soon on Night of the Jumps.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been fun to get to sit here and chat with you about freestyle.